for most of us that are musicians, you would be a musician no matter what. It was not really a choice, I think, for either Noelle or I. You're just born with this thing that you have to do, and it's the only way that you can feel satisfied in life. Hey everybody, I'm Fitz.
And I'm Noelle.
And we're from Fitz and the Tantrums, and you're hanging here with us
and SoundExchange. That's a great question.
There's so many evolution. When we first signed our record deal, upstreaming from an indie to a major, all of a sudden we signed a 360 deal back then. And nobody does 360 deals anymore. But at that time, that was, the labels scrambling to get a piece of everything because they saw their sales dwindling. I think we were lucky enough to stay in the business long enough to negotiate that part out of our contract and stuff. But that's a difference now. People are trying to retain their masters more or do licensing deals. Things have changed so dramatically, even from when we started to this day. It's kind of hard to keep track of where the center point or the focal point even is anymore.
If you're thinking about, we are probably one of the last generations of bands that were still making money off of sales. And from an indie, kind of alternative rock standpoint, right? And then you think about nowadays with the way that music is consumed, it's mainly digital. Unless people are going to your shows, those commodities are not being sought after. There's a certain generation that's buying vinyl, I guess now, that has like the upscale. So when you're just thinking about it from the landscape of new artists that are coming in, they're not signing record deals like they used to. They're way more independent. It's more sought after to be an indie artist. Thinking about La Russell, who's hip hop artist that had been basically doing what Cash Money did, like back in the day with selling a mixtape, but asking people to just pay what they thought the record was worth or the song was worth. And you're starting to see more of that. What I'm also starting to see are more young people knowing about the record industry in a way that they never did when I was coming up. I was like the one that was always encouraging young people to learn about PROs, to figure out what SoundExchange did, to make sure that they were registered, as actual creators. Because I was working with a lot of hip hop artists at the time, and finding out that none of them had their songs registered properly, right? And they were getting ripped off by the labels that they were on. Nobody was paying mechanicals. It was just a very different game now. And I think now more so than ever, we're all very much more knowledgeable about what's happening. I think the rat race right now is how we still earn a living in this environment where everything's kind of turned into technology saying what you should be listening to versus you looking for it and seeking it out. Listen, there's no perfect way. I feel like if you're in this industry and you're pursuing it as a business, you're going to fall on your face. You're going to make the wrong deal. You're going to pursue something that is not necessarily good for you, but it's good for you, right? Because you got to learn that experience and that lesson. I don't think that there's any excuse nowadays to not
You can't afford not to.
You can't. It's also too easy to get the knowledge nowadays. You know what I mean? Like, I could sit here and tell you that the pathway that we took would work for you. That's a lie. Just because it worked for us doesn't mean it's going to work for the next artist or the next band. All I can really say are the rules that used to be the rules are not the rules anymore. Publishing is always going to be publishing. How you collect is always going to be how you collect. I think that's kind of like the standard way of how the business works. But as far as like creative aspects and what you go after, now there's more brands that are paying for tours than there are record labels paying for them. And it's just a different format of how you get income, from the music industry. It's just starting it. There's ChatGPT. There's you know what I mean? Like, I think that kids nowadays are so knowledgeable in how they acquire knowledge that I don't think that you have an excuse to not know. You know what I mean?
Totally. You know, I mean, ChatGPT, like you said, there's a ton of social media people that have got their accounts that are solely dedicated to informing people on some of the choices they may be faced with and what might be the best path for them. I mean, the knowledge is out there, but I agree. I don't think you can afford to not. This day and age, it's so hard to make a living as a musician that you really have to be diligent and you have to be your own advocate.
I mean, all the things. The world is crazy, you know, trying to figure out how to put out positive energy that allows people to transcend joy is probably one of my biggest passions right now. Knowing that we live in a world right now that a lot of people are suffering, people trying to find joy through their anger, and, you know, trying to create music that will touch the spirit in the way that I know that I've been put on this planet to do. That's my passion right now, be it, you know, with the band, be it with my own solo stuff. And, you know, I know that that's something for Fitz as well. That's something that we always try to achieve. But, you know, speaking for myself, I am trying to find that lemonade through a world of lemons, because it's not easy right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to even find an artist that inspires you because there's so much volume. You know, I mean, what is it, 100,000 songs come out a week? You know, I look at New Music Friday on the streaming service I shall not name, and I don't know anybody on there anymore. I mean, I know the top 5 ones they're featuring, but I mean, there's so much music, there's so much out there. It's hard to really understand or to capture, you know. I mean, but music is music. Music is necessity of life. People, whether people make money or are living off music or not, or they're going to try and make all the robots try and make music, you know, at the end of the day, humans love music, and we need it to feed our souls and to release literal dopamine into our brains. I think for most of us that are musicians, you would be a musician no matter what. It was not really a choice, I think, for either Noelle or I. You know, you're just born with this thing that you have to do, and it's the only way that you can feel satisfied in life. So regardless of the expectations of what's out there waiting for us with a career or not, you know, I am just focusing on making music with the intent, like Noelle said, of spreading joy and pushing ourselves as artists. And you make something you're proud of, and hopefully people gravitate towards it. You know, I mean, that song really came out of frustration. You know, we were coming off of the album we had just had before, had 2 #1 alternative hits. It was the biggest moment in our entire career. And the pressure you feel going to your next album can be crushing and suffocating. And it was sort of this process of 6 months trying to write, you know, with everybody around you being like, just write another Out of My League, no problem, write another Walker. And I was like, okay, and kept going in there. And it was 6 months of just lemons. Every day, not good, not even a great album track that would sort of set the compass. And sort of walking into a studio so frustrated after 6 months of literally crying myself to sleep, that just went in the studio frustrated and just sort of abandoned any conscious thought, which was what I was so wrapped up in, trying the expectation that I was just thinking, let's not think at all. Let's just create something fast and not put a lot of my own barriers between us and the song. And we started writing it, and that song wrote itself in 15 minutes. And 7 minutes in, I called the head of our label, and I said, I have the song. And I sent it to the guy, and he said, that doesn't sound like you guys. Which I remind him to this day, every day, that was not the case. But yeah, that song really came out of just sheer frustration and willing to abandon any sort of expectation. And of course, that's when the musical gods are kind enough to give it to you.
You know, I have my own story. Listen, it's I'm one of the purists in the band, and I think for me it was kind of in the beginning I wasn't sure. I had kind of the same response when I first heard it. Is this us? And I think that was more fear driven, coming off of a record where you kind of establish a sound and knowing how fickle fans are. My first thing is are we going to release this and everybody's going to hate it? And then I got into the studio and started working on the track, and it felt exciting. I could feel that energy, and I understood the push that Fitz felt when, he had written the song with Sam Hollander. And I was like, okay, I can give it a chance. I'll give it a chance. But, it's always in your head. You have that fear. And I think I had the same fear with Out of My League as well. I think there was a lot of pushing. Are we doing this the right way? Or we're coming off of picking up the pieces and we're Motown Stax, and now we're doing mostly new wave. And it was this kind of shift, knowing the songs are great, but is it going to be we fall on our faces, And I had to kind of work through that. And I've been proven wrong a number of times in my own thing, So I think my learning experience has been just letting go and letting the songs be what they're going to be and just having fun with it.
Fear and ambition.
Yeah, that. What else are we going to do? This is our career. You know what I mean? You're going to quit? Can't make the songs. Nope, that's it. We're done. You know what I mean? Like, you can't. We love what we do. And I think that pursuit and just being who we are when we're writing songs and just having a good time together, I think that is what is the push, especially when you go on tour and you go on stage and you're listening to people sing your songs that you've just spent almost a year kind of creating and packaging and figuring out the best way to get the music out to your fans, and then being on the road in a box. And then you come on stage for 90 minutes, 75, however long we play, and they're singing every single word. And that's the validation that you get. That's the reminder of what you're doing this for. You're not doing this for you all the time. It's definitely to spread joy, which is what we try to do all the time.
Oh, that list is long, my brother. That list is so long. I mean, first of all, the way that artists are paid via streaming services, historically, anybody, we have been fortunate enough to do a lot of licensing of our music for commercials, TV, films, and stuff like that. It's always favor nation. The two fees are always equal, master, pub. And somehow in the streaming age, that's not what exists anymore. And the tiered paid systems, the bundling with audiobooks and all these things, it's shocking to me that we're having to struggle as hard with songs that are streaming 1 billion times on these servers, and then watching these executives make more money than any artist combined. I think it's unsustainable, and for me personally, I'm waiting for somebody to find a better way to provide streaming services that's a little more equitable to everybody involved.
I think when I found out about it, I was like, how long are we going to keep letting this happen? It took
Same.
a really long time for anybody to do anything about it. And I think, look, timing is the timing. It's great. The advocacy is there. I know that there is a lot of advocacy for song creators and performers now more so than any time I've seen it. And I think it's because the industry is starting to feel the pinch, right? So for me, it was just kind of like, how long is it going to take, or, is it that important? You know what I mean? So I love seeing that this is happening, and obviously I'm all for it, especially if it's going to help younger generation of artists that are able to get on radio. It's so difficult to get on radio now, that, they need to be paid for their time and their energy.
True that. Well, I think we have, as a society, have sort of gotten into this place where we've lost the ability to understand the value of creation and being an artist. Music was the most vulnerable to the digital revolution. It was the first art form that could be turned into zeros and ones and transmitted easily, We all need to make a living from our craft, just like any other service, like any other part of society, whether you're doctor, lawyer, whatever the thing is. We feed a critical part of society. We are all working. We're all putting our energies. And to see ourselves, other artists, I'm big in the songwriting community, to see everybody struggling to figure out a way to make a living from this art that is so freely disseminated with the zeros and ones, and everybody's consuming it. It's about high time, I think, that we all sort of take a step back and say, oh, just because I can't see the transfer of the files or how disposable this all feels now doesn't mean that the value or the merit or the worth of what we do isn't deserving of compensation. Because we do, and if this state that we're in continues or certainly progresses anymore, there won't be any superstars anymore. There won't be anybody who's really able to make a living. It will be almost like hobbyist, or it'll be just a sea of independent artists that have decided to forego the whole entire system top to bottom in order to carve out their piece of a living, But we have to change something here in order for people to survive making art when people are consuming it at a higher rate than they ever have before,
I think it's also something to be said with the perspective of artists and the forgetfulness that we are human beings. And just because you see us on a screen doesn't mean that we're good. And our craft is not a hobby. I would say that to any senator out there, any congressional leader that has a say.
Sorry to interrupt. A perfect example. Our music gets played in almost every sports arena in America, every night for every sports game. I get at least 2 texts a day. I'm at Starbucks, heard your music. I'm at Target, heard your music. I'm at Home Depot. We and people are under some illusion that we're making a lot of money. And when I tell them that we're making nothing or 1/100th of 1 penny per play at Starbucks or in the arena, perfect example, watching the World Series. Hear HandClap 3 times during Game 2 in the arena. Did we make any money for that? I don't think so. And people have this perception that just because we're having success, they see us on TV, like she's saying, they hear us everywhere, they think that there's a Brinks truck pulling up to our back door, and that's not the case. If anything, there's even less money than before. We are lucky. We started before this full evolution happened. I have no idea how a younger artist that hasn't achieved some of our success is even making 2 ends meet right now. It's pretty shocking.
Yeah.
Sorry to be a negative Nelly, but
Well, what I will go back to saying is any congressional leader or anybody that has the power to help shift the narrative as it relates to fairness and compensation for artists is to remind themselves that what we do is not a hobby. It is not something that is just for the consumption of pleasure for people, that we actually do have bills to pay, that we do perform and participate in the working community from their tourism business down to taxes. We contribute a lot to society as it relates to the money that our government does see. So to be a part of making sure that we're able to pay our rent and that we're not working at Starbucks when we have a #1 hit song on Billboard is super important to be a part of in some way, because we are contributing to society in a major way, not in just what's happening at your wedding. So I think it's just a reminder of how we contribute to society in a way that can be formulated into dollars for folks.